The cake hit her face before anyone could stop it. Frosting exploded across her cheeks and hair sliding down her skin as laughter ripped through the ballroom like broken glass. Emma Collins stood frozen beneath the chandeliers of a 5-star hotel in Manhattan, her breath trapped in her chest, while Margaret Reynolds smiled as if she had merely spilled a drink instead of shattering a woman's dignity. The Grand Astor Hotel glittered with wealth that night. Crystal lights burned overhead, champagne flowed endlessly, and the air was thick with perfume power and quiet cruelty. It was Lauren Reynolds' anniversary celebration, a gathering of executives, donors, and social elites who measured worth by last names and net worth. Emma did not belong to this world, at least not in their eyes. She wore a simple cream dress, elegant, but restrained her hair softly, pinned back, her hands bare of diamonds. To them, she was Daniel Reynolds' unfortunate mistake, the kindergarten teacher who had somehow slipped into a family built on influence and money. Margaret had been watching her all evening, waiting. When the cake was rolled out tall and flawless, Margaret called Emma forward with a voice sweet enough to sting. "Since you work with children," she said lightly, "you must be good at helping." The guests leaned in, already smiling. Emma stepped closer, her pulse racing, sensing danger, but unable to retreat without causing a scene. Then Margaret's hand moved, not clumsy, not accidental. She drove a slab of cake straight into Emma's face, hard enough to sting, hard enough to humiliate. Laughter erupted instantly. Someone clapped, someone whistled. Lauren lifted her phone and began recording, her grin sharp with delight. Emma's world narrowed to sound and sensation. Sticky frosting in her eyes, the smell of sugar and butter, the heat of humiliation burning her skin. She heard whispers cutting through the laughter. Poor girl, gold digger. She thought she belonged here. A woman in red muttered that Emma should go back to babysitting where she came from. A man near the bar laughed and said this was what happened when people forgot their place. Emma did not cry. She could not. Her body refused, locking her into stillness, as if movement would shatter her completely. Margaret dabbed her fingers with a napkin, pretending concern, while her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Oh dear," she said, "how careless of me. You really must be more comfortable at events like this." Lauren moved closer, her phone inches from Emma's face, capturing every second. "This is priceless," she whispered. The room fed on the moment. Phones appeared. Smiles widened. No one intervened. Not one person thought to ask if this had gone too far. To them, Emma was disposable. Entertainment. Proof that the Reynolds family still decided who was worthy and who was not. Across the room, a few guests shifted uncomfortably. A waiter hesitated, holding a towel he never delivered. A woman near the back frowned, her laughter fading. But silence won. Power always did. Emma felt it then, the full weight of being judged small, being stripped of dignity without a single word spoken in her defense. She wondered briefly if Daniel knew what was happening, if he would walk in at that exact moment and see her like this. The thought hurt almost as much as the cake sliding down her dress. Margaret leaned in close, her voice low enough to sound almost kind. "You should be grateful," she murmured. "Not everyone gets invited into rooms like this." Emma finally blinked, frosting falling from her lashes. She met Margaret's eyes, and for just a second, something unreadable passed between them. Margaret saw only a quiet young woman, humiliated and cornered. What she did not see was the stillness behind Emma's gaze, the restraint forged from a lifetime of choosing silence over spectacle, dignity over revenge. The laughter began to fade, replaced by the hum of awkward conversation as the moment lost its novelty. Emma remained where she stood, breathing carefully, holding herself together piece by piece. She wiped her face slowly, deliberately, as if reclaiming control through the smallest movement. In that instant, no one in the room understood what they had truly done. They believed they had humiliated someone powerless. They believed the story was over. They had no idea this was only the beginning. Emma Collins did not always look like someone easy to overlook, but she had learned how to make herself invisible. Every morning, she left her modest apartment in Brooklyn just after sunrise, locking the door quietly, as if apologizing to the world for taking up space. The building was old, its hallway lights flickering its walls marked by years of lives passing through without ceremony. Emma liked it that way. She wore simple clothes, walked instead of taking taxis when she could, and blended into the rhythm of the city with practiced ease. To anyone watching, she was just another young woman heading to work, another teacher carrying lesson plans and quiet dreams. Her days were spent in a public kindergarten a few blocks from the East River, a place filled with chipped paint, mismatched chairs, and children who carried their own small storms inside them. Emma loved it fiercely. She knelt on the floor to tie shoelaces, wiped tears with patient hands, and celebrated victories that no one else ever saw. When a child learned to write their name for the first time, when a shy voice finally spoke up, she felt richer than she ever had in her life. Her colleagues knew her as kind, slightly reserved the teacher who stayed late and never complained. None of them knew why she never talked about her family or why she smiled politely whenever money came up in conversation. The truth lived far from the classroom hidden behind glass towers and private boardrooms. Emma was the only daughter of Robert Collins, a man whose name shaped skylines and moved markets. He was one of the most powerful real estate magnates in the country, a figure spoken about in financial columns with a mix of admiration and fear. Emma had grown up surrounded by privilege most people could not imagine, raised in houses that felt more like museums than homes watched by staff who smiled but never stayed. She learned early what wealth did to people, how it bent their words, how it changed the way they looked at her before they ever knew her. When she was barely into her 20s, Emma made a choice that stunned everyone who knew the truth. She took her mother's last name, packed a single suitcase, and asked her father to let her go. Robert had not argued. He had looked at her for a long moment, his expression heavy with understanding and regret, and told her that if she wanted a real life, she would have to protect it fiercely. He helped her quietly, legally, carefully ensuring her independence without advertising it. Only one lawyer knew the full extent of what Emma walked away from. Everyone else believed she was ordinary because that was exactly how she wanted it. Living without the shield of her family's wealth was both terrifying and freeing. Emma learned how to budget, how to wait for sales, how to live with uncertainty. She learned the sharp edge of being underestimated and the quiet satisfaction of surviving on her own terms. There were moments she questioned herself, nights when exhaustion pressed heavy on her chest, but she never once considered going back. She wanted love that did not calculate friendships, that did not negotiate a life that belonged to her alone. That belief shaped every choice she made, including the one that led her to Daniel Reynolds. When Emma met Daniel, he did not arrive with grandeur or announcement. He walked into her classroom one afternoon as part of a technology grant program, his company-sponsored sleeves rolled up, curiosity genuine. He spoke to the children as if they mattered, listened when Emma explained their needs, and thanked her as if she had given him something invaluable. She noticed the way he looked at her, not appraising, not impressed, just interested. When he asked her to coffee, she said yes. Without knowing his name, carried weight in rooms she had learned to avoid. With Daniel, Emma was simply herself. They walked through parks, shared cheap dinners, talked about values and failures and the future they imagined. He never asked why she lived so modestly or pushed her to explain her past. He respected her boundaries instinctively, and that trust rooted itself deeply in her heart. Emma did not tell him who she really was, because she needed to know who he was first. She needed to be sure his love would not change when the truth eventually surfaced. That night in the ballroom, as cake dried on her skin and laughter echoed behind her eyes, Emma remembered every reason she had chosen this life. The humiliation hurt, but it did not break her. What broke her quietly was the realization that the world she had tried to escape had found her anyway, wearing a different face. She stood there, breathing through the pain, unaware that the story unfolding around her was already moving toward a truth no one in that room was ready to face. Daniel Reynolds entered Emma Collins' life without spectacle, and that was precisely why she noticed him. He did not arrive wrapped in authority or expectation, nor did he announce his importance when he stepped into her classroom one quiet afternoon. He wore a simple jacket sleeves pushed up, his attention focused on the children, clustered around low tables smeared with paint and glue. Emma watched him from across the room as he crouched to listen to a little boy explain a crooked drawing, nodding as if the story mattered. Something in that moment unsettled her, not because he impressed her, but because he did not perform. He was present. That alone set him apart. Daniel was there as part of an education technology initiative his company sponsored, though Emma did not know then that he was the founder and chief executive. He asked thoughtful questions not about budgets or optics, but about resources, about what the children needed and what the teachers struggled with most. When Emma spoke, he listened fully, his eyes steady, his posture open. At the end of the visit, he thanked her with genuine warmth, as if she had given him something rather than the other way around. When he asked her to get coffee to talk more about the program, she hesitated only a second before agreeing, unaware that her life had just shifted its axis. Their first coffee lasted hours. Conversation flowed easily, wandering from work to childhood memories to the strange loneliness of big cities. Daniel spoke of building something from nothing, of failure and pressure, of the quiet weight of responsibility. He did not mention money, and Emma did not ask. She spoke about teaching, about the small triumphs that made the long days worthwhile, about choosing a life that felt honest, even when it was hard. Daniel watched her with a curiosity that felt unguarded, and Emma felt something she had trained herself not to feel too quickly: safety. What followed unfolded slowly, deliberately. Walks through crowded parks, late dinners at unremarkable restaurants, conversations that deepened rather than dazzled. Daniel never tried to impress her with luxury or status. He respected her boundaries without questioning them, paid attention to what mattered to her, and showed up when he said he would. Emma noticed how careful he was with her trust, how he never pushed for answers she was not ready to give. With him, she felt seen for who she was in the present moment, not for a past she had buried or a future she refused to advertise. Emma told herself she would reveal the truth when the time was right. She had done this before, allowed relationships to grow, only to watch them fracture the moment wealth entered the room. People changed when they knew. Their eyes sharpened their affection, recalculated. Daniel did not feel like those people, but fear was patient. It whispered caution in her ear, reminded her of everything she stood to lose if she was wrong. So she stayed silent, not out of deceit, but out of longing for something pure, something untouched by numbers and names. Daniel fell in love without knowing it all at once. It happened in pieces, in the way Emma laughed when she was tired, in the way she spoke to strangers with quiet kindness, in the way she defended her students as if they were her own family. He admired her strength, her restraint, her refusal to measure worth the way the world demanded. To him, Emma Collins was extraordinary because she was grounded, because she chose meaning over spectacle. When he realized he could not imagine a future without her, the decision felt less like a leap and more like a truth finally acknowledged. The proposal was simple, intentional. They stood by the water one evening as the city softened into dusk lights flickering on one by one. Daniel did not kneel with a crowd watching. He did not offer grand speeches or impossible promises. He spoke quietly, honestly about partnership, about choosing each other even when it was hard. Emma said yes through tears. She did not try to hide her heart full and aching all at once. She had found what she had been searching for, and the joy of it frightened her as much as it thrilled her. Marriage followed, intimate and restrained, attended by friends who knew them as individuals, not symbols. Emma stepped into the Reynolds family cautiously aware that love did not guarantee acceptance. She hoped foolishly that time and character would be enough. Daniel believed it would be. He underestimated how deeply his family clung to hierarchy, how quickly they judged how cruel they could be when challenged by someone they deemed lesser. Emma endured the early discomfort quietly believing patience would eventually soften them. That belief carried her into the ballroom on the night everything cracked open. She did not know then that the man she loved would soon be forced to choose between blood and truth, between the world that raised him and the woman who had shown him what mattered. She only knew that love had led her here into a room glittering with judgment, toward a reckoning no one had planned, but everyone would feel. From the moment Emma Collins stepped into the Reynolds family home, the air turned sharp. It was not loud hostility, not open rejection, but something colder, more precise. Margaret Reynolds assessed her the way one evaluated a flaw in an otherwise flawless design, her eyes lingering on Emma's dress, her posture the absence of visible markers that signaled worth in Margaret's world. The greeting was polite enough to pass in public, but the undertone was unmistakable. Emma was an inconvenience, a disruption to a lineage carefully curated through wealth, reputation, and strategic alliances. Lauren Reynolds followed her mother's lead with less restraint. She smiled when required, but her eyes carried open contempt, flicking to Emma, and away again as if contact itself was a burden. Conversation circled around investments, charity galas, and people Emma had never heard of. When she tried to contribute, her words were acknowledged with thin nods or redirected entirely. Margaret made small comments that landed like needles. "Teaching children must be so simple," she remarked once her voice light her meaning anything but. Emma smiled and absorbed it, reminding herself that patience was a choice, not a weakness. Daniel noticed, of course. He always did. He interrupted when he could correct it. His mother gently defended Emma in quiet ways that never quite reached confrontation. To him, the tension felt manageable, something time would smooth over. He had grown up navigating Margaret's expectations, learned how to soften her sharp edges with compromise. Emma, however, felt each slight accumulate, stacking inside her chest like invisible weight. She did not want Daniel to fight his family for her. She wanted to earn her place, foolish as that hope was. The accusations came soon after, whispered at first, then spoken freely among those Margaret trusted. Emma was called calculating, opportunistic, a woman who had chosen her target well. Someone mentioned the school sponsorship, the coincidence of where Daniel had met her. Margaret laughed when she repeated the story to friends, her amusement edged with certainty. Emma overheard more than once, standing just out of sight, her presence dismissed so completely that they forgot she could hear. Each word cut deeper than the last, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little her character mattered to them. At social gatherings, Emma was paraded, subtly introduced with qualifiers that diminished her before she could speak. "This is Daniel's wife, Margaret," would say the kindergarten teacher, as if the profession itself explained everything. Guests smiled with curiosity or pity, their eyes skimming over Emma in search of something they could measure. Lauren delighted in the performance, amplifying the narrative with jokes and raised brows. Emma felt herself shrinking in those rooms, not because she believed their judgment, but because resisting it required energy she did not always have. She considered telling the truth more than once. The temptation flared brightest after particularly cruel moments when silence felt like complicity in her own erasure. But she held back, bound by the promise she had made to herself and to Daniel. She wanted to be seen, not bought. She wanted acceptance rooted in who she was, not what she owned. Every insult became a test she believed she could pass through grace alone. She did not yet understand that some people mistook grace for weakness and treated it accordingly. Margaret's behavior sharpened as Emma refused to break. The woman sensed something she could not name, an unyielding calm that frustrated her attempts to assert dominance. Emma did not cry in public. She did not argue or retreat. She remained polite, present, unmovable. That composure unsettled Margaret more than defiance would have. It suggested depth, resilience, a confidence that did not need validation. Margaret responded the only way she knew how, by escalating, by pushing until something cracked. Lauren encouraged it, feeding her mother's resentment with mockery disguised as concern. She hinted that Emma was embarrassing Daniel, that his reputation was at risk, that their world would never truly accept someone like her. Daniel dismissed it when confronted, insisting that love mattered more than perception. Emma watched these exchanges with quiet unease, aware that Daniel's loyalty was being tested, even if he did not see it yet. She loved him deeply, but she feared the cost of standing between him and the family that shaped him. By the time the anniversary celebration was announced, the tension had hardened into something dangerous. Emma felt it instinctively, a tightening in her chest that warned her this event would not be like the others. Margaret framed the invitation as an obligation, a chance for Emma to prove herself in front of the right people. Daniel encouraged her to go, confident his presence would be enough to keep things civil. When his schedule threatened to delay him, Emma hesitated, then agreed to attend alone. She told herself she could handle it. She had handled everything else. As she prepared that night, smoothing her dress, steadying her breath, Emma did not know she was walking into a trap, carefully laid by people who believed power protected them from consequence. She did not know that patience had run its course, that silence would soon be mistaken for surrender. All she knew was that love had brought her this far, and that whatever waited for her beyond the ballroom doors would demand more than grace. It would demand truth. The night of the anniversary arrived wrapped in excess. The Grand Astor Hotel shimmered like a monument to indulgence, its entrance lined with black cars and polished smiles. Emma Collins stepped out alone, her heels echoing softly against marble as she crossed into a world that had never wanted her. She wore the same cream dress she had chosen, carefully elegant without defiance, refined without spectacle. Daniel's message still lingered in her mind, apologetic, promising he would arrive as soon as he could. Emma believed him. She always had. Still, the absence of his presence pressed against her ribs as soon as she entered the ballroom. Inside the room pulsed with privilege. Laughter rose and fell in practiced rhythms, glasses clinked, and conversations carried the casual arrogance of people accustomed to being admired. Heads turned as Emma passed. Some recognized her immediately. Others followed the subtle cues of Margaret Reynolds, whose gaze sharpened the moment she saw Emma alone. A faint smile curved Margaret's lips, not of welcome, but of opportunity. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when Emma stood unguarded, separated from the one shield she respected. Lauren intercepted Emma near the center of the room, her voice bright and empty. "You came," she said, as if surprised Emma had found the courage. "How brave." Emma offered congratulations, genuine, despite everything, but Lauren had already turned away, leaving Emma standing amid a cluster of strangers who regarded her with open curiosity. Whispers followed. the teacher, Daniel's wife, the one his mother hates. Emma felt the room tighten around her, every smile edged with expectation. The cake arrived like a crown jewel, tall, flawless, surrounded by cameras. Margaret lifted her glass, commanding attention with ease earned over decades of influence. When she called Emma's name, the sound cut through the room with surgical precision. "Since you work with children," she said sweetly, "perhaps you can help us serve?" A ripple of amusement passed through the guests. Emma hesitated, then stepped forward. Refusal would only confirm their narrative. Compliance, she hoped, might quiet it. She reached for the plate. Margaret held out her hand steady, despite the warning thrumming in her veins. Before Emma could take it, Lauren laughed and leaned in. "Mother shouldn't. She'd taste it first. Make sure it's good enough for everyone else." Laughter burst louder this time. Emma opened her mouth to respond, to gently decline, but Margaret was already moving. The plate tipped. The cake did not fall. It flew. The impact was sharp and deliberate. Frosting slammed into Emma's face, coating her skin, her hair, her dress in thick white ruin. The sound was obscene, wet and final. For a heartbeat, silence hung stunned by the audacity of it. Then the room exploded. Laughter roared, unrestrained and cruel. Someone clapped. Someone shouted encouragement. Lauren's phone rose instantly, capturing every second, her delight unhidden. Emma staggered back, blinking against sugar and tears, her vision blurred not just by frosting but by disbelief. Margaret gasped theatrically. "Oh my goodness," she said, covering her mouth with fingers that trembled only with excitement. "How careless of me." The lie was transparent, but no one challenged it. Instead, voices piled on. "She looks ridiculous." Did she really think she belonged here? Emma felt the sting beneath her skin, the humiliation seeping into her bones. Her hands shook, but she did not raise them. She stood there, drenched and silent, as if rooted to the spot. Lauren circled closer, her phone inches away. "This is unforgettable," she whispered. Emma caught her reflection in the screen mascara-streaked dress, ruined eyes wide but unbroken. The image felt unreal, like watching someone else fall apart. Around her, the party continued feeding on the spectacle. Some guests laughed because it was easier than intervening. Others watched because power had taught them that cruelty was entertainment when directed at the right target. Emma wiped her face slowly, frosting smearing across her palm. Her breath came shallow, controlled by sheer will. She did not scream, she did not flee, she would not give them that satisfaction. In that moment, stripped of dignity by design, Emma understood something with sudden clarity. This was not a misunderstanding, this was a declaration. And declarations once made demanded answers. The laughter was still echoing when the ballroom doors swung open. The sound cut through the noise like a blade, sharp and final, and every head turned at once. Daniel Reynolds stood in the doorway, his presence instantly shifting the air. He had come straight from a boardroom, across town jacket, still on tie, loosened the tension of unfinished business clinging to him. But all of that vanished the moment his eyes found Emma. She stood at the center of the room, drenched in cake. Her dress ruined her face, pale but composed. And something inside him broke open with cold, controlled fury. Daniel crossed the room without hesitation. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something they could not name but did not dare resist. He stopped in front of Emma and said nothing at first. He simply took out a handkerchief from his pocket and began wiping the frosting from her face with a gentleness that made her breath hitch. His jaw tightened as he took in the red marks on her skin, the way her hands trembled despite her effort to remain still. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, for her alone. Emma nodded once, unable to speak, and that was enough. He turned then slowly, deliberately, and the room fell into a silence so complete it felt heavy. Someone handed him a microphone, and Daniel accepted it without breaking eye contact with his mother. "I have seen enough," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Margaret began to laugh nervously, stepping forward. "Daniel, darling, it was just a joke, an accident." Daniel did not raise his voice when he cut her off. "Do not call that an accident. You did this. Everyone here saw you do this." He swept his gaze across the guests, his words gaining weight with every step. "For months, you have humiliated the woman I love. You mocked her work, her background, her worth. You decided she was less because she did not wear her value on her body." He paused, letting the truth settle. "My mother and my sister led that cruelty, and you all participated by laughing." Lauren tried to lower her phone, but Daniel's eyes locked onto her. "Do not delete that video. Keep it, watch it. Remember who you were tonight." The room shifted unease, spreading like a crack beneath polished surfaces. Then Daniel spoke the words that changed everything. "You want to know who Emma Collins really is." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Emma reached for his arm, instinctively trying to stop him, but Daniel gently pressed her hand down. "Her name is Emma Carter Collins, the daughter of Robert Collins, the Robert Collins." Gasps tore through the silence. Faces drained of color as recognition landed. Daniel continued, his voice unwavering. "She is the sole heir to an empire worth more than this entire room combined. She owns buildings you walk past every day and never notice. She could have lived a life of excess without lifting a finger. Instead, she chose to teach children. She chose a quiet life. She chose love." He turned back to Emma, his expression softening. "I fell in love with her without knowing any of that, and I would do it again." Margaret stumbled back as if struck, her mouth opening without sound. The power she had wielded moments ago evaporated, replaced by disbelief and fear. The truth hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. What had begun as humiliation had become revelation, and the room understood too late that they had mistaken silence for weakness and humility for insignificance. The silence had barely settled when the doors opened again. This time, no one laughed. No one whispered. The sound of measured footsteps crossed the marble floor, steady and unhurried, carrying a weight that bent the room without a single word spoken. Robert Collins entered with quiet authority, dressed in a tailored gray suit, his presence unmistakable to anyone who had ever watched markets move or skylines change. Conversations died in throats. Faces stiffened. Recognition spread like a shockwave. The room understood instantly that this was not a man you questioned. Robert's eyes found Emma at once. The frosting in her hair, the ruined dress, the exhaustion etched beneath her composure. His expression did not explode with anger. It darkened, controlled, and lethal, the kind of restraint that came from decades of knowing exactly how power worked. He crossed the room and pulled his daughter into his arms without hesitation, ignoring the mess, the cameras, the witnesses. "It is all right. Now," he said quietly, his voice steady enough to ground her. "I am here." He released her and turned slowly, deliberately to face the room. When Robert Collins looked at someone, it felt like being measured and found lacking. "I believe introductions are no longer necessary," he said calmly, though every person there knew his name. "This is my daughter, my only child, the most valuable thing in my life." He let the words settle, then continued. "You humiliated her. Publicly. Intentionally." Margaret Reynolds tried to speak, her voice fractured before it formed a sentence. Robert did not raise his voice when he addressed her. He did not need to. "You used cruelty as entertainment. You taught your guests that dignity is conditional. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. And you all laughed. Some of you filmed it. Some of you did nothing. Silence, he added, is a choice. Tonight you chose poorly. He gestured slightly, and one of his security team handed him a tablet. Video footage appeared on the large screens behind the stage, pulled from multiple angles. Margaret's hand moving with intent. Lauren's phone rising eagerly. The laughter, the applause, the calculated smiles. The evidence was undeniable. People shifted uncomfortably, confronted with their own reflections. This was not a misunderstanding. It was documented truth. Robert turned back to Margaret. You sit on the board of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation, correct? Margaret nodded faintly, her pride already crumbling. Not anymore, Robert said. I am the largest private donor. That ends tonight. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. He looked at Lauren next. Your husband's firm handles several of my holdings. They will not after tomorrow. Lauren's knees buckled slightly as the consequences landed with full force. He did not stop there. Contracts dissolved in quiet sentences, partnerships withdrawn, influence erased with surgical precision. Robert did not threaten, he informed. Each word stripped power from those who had wielded it carelessly minutes earlier. You are fortunate, he said finally, that I am handling this privately. If I chose otherwise, this would already be tomorrow's headline. The room understood what mercy looked like when it came from someone who did not need to offer it. Emma stepped forward, then her voice steady despite the storm around her. I did not want this, she said. I did not want my name to be armor. I wanted to be judged by who I am. She looked directly at Margaret. But you do not respect character. You respect status. And that is why you failed. Her words were not shouted. They were final. Daniel moved to her side, taking her hand without ceremony. We are leaving, he said simply. Do not contact us until you understand why what you did was wrong. Not because of who she is, but because of what you did. They turned together, Emma, between the two men who loved her fiercely, and walked out as the room stood frozen in the wreckage of its own arrogance. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. The fallout came quietly at first, then all at once. By morning, the story had slipped beyond the walls of the ballroom and into the currents that moved reputations. Phones rang and went unanswered. Invitations were rescinded without explanation. Boards convened emergency meetings and discovered too late that influence was fragile when it rested on cruelty. Margaret Reynolds woke to a world that no longer returned her calls, and Lauren found that the laughter she once commanded had turned into averted eyes and careful distance. The reckoning did not shout. It simply arrived and stayed. Emma Collins did not celebrate any of it. She returned to her classroom after a few days, stepping back into the familiar chaos of small voices and bright drawings, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Children greeted her with unfiltered joy. A colleague asked if she was feeling better. Emma smiled and said she was. The simplicity steadied her. In that room, no one asked who her father was or what her last name meant. They cared only that she showed up, that she listened, that she stayed. That was the life she had chosen, and she was not ready to give it up simply because the world now knew her truth. Daniel moved out of his family home that same week. He did not argue or explain. He packed what mattered and left the rest behind, choosing clarity over comfort. He and Emma spoke long into the nights, not about revenge or vindication, but about boundaries, about what it meant to build a future without silence as the price of peace. Daniel apologized for every moment he had underestimated the cost of his family's judgment. Emma forgave him without hesitation, not because he asked, but because he had stood beside her when it mattered most. The letter arrived months later, handwritten on thick paper, that once symbolized status. Margaret's words were careful, stripped of entitlement, heavy with a shame she had never allowed herself to feel before. She admitted cruelty without excuse and asked for nothing in return. Emma read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. Forgiveness, she understood now, was not a performance. It was a process. She agreed to meet once on her terms in a place that did not belong to anyone's empire. The conversation was restrained, honest, and bound by rules Emma no longer feared enforcing. Lauren's apology came later tangled with self-pity and regret, sharpened by consequence. Emma listened without interrupting, then spoke plainly about harm and responsibility. Change, she said, was measured over time, not promised in moments of fear. Lauren nodded, humbled in a way she had never been before. Whether it would last was not Emma's concern. She had learned that other people's growth was not her burden to carry. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Emma and Daniel built a home rooted in transparency, where wealth was a tool rather than an identity. Emma began supporting education initiatives quietly, her name absent from plaques and announcements. She donated where it mattered and listened where it counted. Daniel followed her lead, redirecting resources with intention rather than spectacle. Together, they learned that power could be gentle when guided by purpose. Sometimes, when Emma passed a mirror, she remembered the frosting sliding down her face, the laughter, the stillness that followed. The memory no longer hurt the way it once had. It reminded her of something essential. Silence was not weakness. Humility was not absence. And dignity, once claimed, did not need to be defended with noise. She had been underestimated because she allowed it, and in doing so, she had seen the world clearly. On an ordinary afternoon, as she watched her students line up for recess, Emma felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. She had chosen love without conditions, work without applause, and truth without armor. The night meant to break her had revealed the measure of everyone in that room, including herself. And in that revelation she had found peace. The cake, the laughter, the exposure had not defined her. Her response had, and that she knew was the only ending that mattered. In the years that followed, Emma never spoke publicly about that night unless asked, and even then her words were measured, thoughtful, never bitter. She understood now that stories gained power not from spectacle, but from meaning. Occasionally someone would recognize her name and look at her differently, searching for the woman behind the headlines. Emma would meet their gaze calmly, unchanged, grounded in the life she had built by choice. She had learned that true authority did not announce itself. It stood quietly, acted deliberately, and left behind something better than it found. That lesson stayed with her steady and unshakable long after the echoes of laughter had faded for good. From a psychological and social perspective, this story is not about wealth being revealed. It is about power being misunderstood. True power is not loud, decorative, or cruel. It is the ability to remain grounded under pressure, to choose integrity when silence would be easier, and to draw boundaries without becoming what hurt you. Emma's journey reminds us that people often judge worth using shortcuts, status appearance, proximity to power, because self-reflection is harder. The moment truth surfaces, those shortcuts collapse. What remains is character. If this story resonated with you, take a second to show your support. Like this video if you believe dignity should never depend on status. Subscribe if you want more stories that challenge assumptions and reveal quiet strength. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. Share your perspective using just one short phrase. Know your worth.